The Midnight Academy.
As a professional in the realm of mental health and psychology and somebody who's educated, do you believe in demons?
It's interesting. It's such a good question, and I will answer it so differently depending on the context of every way it's presented. Um, I believe in I believe in invisible forces, whether they are created through mind, through imagination, through some other realm. I don't know the answer to that. And with that, I humbly sort of say, but I've seen some evidence of these forces and how they destroy people. Whether that's real or not, I believe it's real enough, at least through the perception of those individuals, to take it seriously. And whether it's a child or an adult, and to work with this idea, and to approach it very tenderly, but to believe the person, because often there's so much shame that comes with these experiences that we can't quite fit in our pretty little box that makes sense. And when we don't understand something, what I've learned is it's often labeled evil. It's
Mm.
easier to call something evil than to investigate it, than to have a curiosity about it, especially if it's bumping up against some type of deeper belief. Maybe that might be a family structure or pattern. It could be a religious dynamic. And those things aren't, I don't think, inherently negative, but I do think they create these invisible and spoken rules that we live within. And so we bring in the idea of like demon, all of a sudden we don't even have to say anymore. And some people are just going to hear that alone and be very activated by the possibilities of that.
Mm.
There's one time I did work with a client, and I can share this story because I won't say the personal details or anything. And it challenged me a little bit. There are actually two stories that come to mind, but the first one, I helped someone who was having physical scratches and bruising and things happen, was waking up to these different things on the body. And it wasn't just them. It was also, there was other family members in the same household that were having that experience.
Mm.
And they were convinced it had something to do with um, either a curse, or they were that was part of the possibility that they thought, because again, the logical mind is also trying to find a source, a reason. And when that wasn't happening, the bruises, the scratches, that's enough evidence, right? Something physical. It's really hard to turn away from, to deny something when it's in front of us like that, which clearly got their attention and made them more scared. So one option they had was a curse. And then the other was, this reminds me of like the Brady Bunch, where they took
Oh,
something from a trip or vacation that they shouldn't have, from like Hawaii, and
I
it caused
remember.
problems, right? Like some kind of
Yeah.
that. It was similar but different. And they really believed there was a stone or something that may have been sacred, or whatever it was that was brought home with them. And it started after, according to them, it started after that point, these nightmares and this reaction. The children didn't have the reaction right away. The adults did. And I thought that was interesting, right? I try to look at these things with curiosity, try to not necessarily have an association right away, or try to come at it from a very open beginner's mind. Because I feel like for me, that's what helps my research, helps me gather information, maybe see or hear or feel something that isn't so solid in my framework. And so I'm listening to the stories, and it wasn't until it was like years later, this went on for years with this individual. Years later is when the oldest child started to have some of these things. So this was like, we're talking multiple decade situation that these people went through. I
Wow.
didn't know them the entirety of that time, but I did know them for a chunk of that time. And I recall one moment in person where we were talking through this. And I had this very strong sort of intuition, which, comes a lot to for a lot of people that are therapists or healers or coaches or psychotherapists. When you're sharing a space with someone, it's actually very common to pick up on things. It can seem eerie, it can seem psychic, but there's a connection there. And so we're sitting and we're talking, and I have this thought to ask her about relationships, and again, not going too deeply into the personal information. There was a chaotic relationship There was a very traumatic, narcissistic relationship that had happened. And that had happened early on, around the same time that this had started. And so, anyway, that entire situation ended up teaching me a lot about the way the thoughts can impact the body, the way the body can speak to us through symptoms, through in its own language in a way. And it sounds very mysterious, but really, if we pay attention, it's no different than like feeling stress and having a headache, or being fatigued and just feeling like, the whole body is just carrying this tension. So obviously an extreme version of mind body sort of connection, but that's what ultimately I ended up discovering was happening here. The inability to process the abusiveness of the situation in the relationship, the body started to take it on. And it did begin to settle. The symptoms, the things began to settle when we worked on addressing the fears, the unconscious fears and the unprocessed emotion. And I want to be mindful to say that may not be the case for every situation around the idea of demons. But it just came to mind because it was so fascinating that whatever the potential was, the body was showing that there's something going on here. And it really was an interesting idea for me at the time that could happen. Because even thinking about just the body, like how does a bruise or a scratch appear through the mind? I wanted to make it like maybe they're sleeping, and they scratch themselves and don't notice.
Yeah.
Something like that, but there was no recollection at all of that. The other thing, just to kind of like wrap up this part of the story, the other thing is that oldest son who was involved observed some of the abusive behavior. So I think that's kind of interesting as well, that the younger one didn't have as much exposure, as much contact, and also didn't have the same type of manifestations. So there could be more to that. It's always possible. There's something else, some other invisible force or what have you. But I definitely believe that there are parts of us also that are very compulsive. I think even just tying back to the serial killer conversation a little bit, I've been able to kind of see some of those structures within the psyche, and when we literalize something, it can become very dangerous. So I'm not going to say it's my only way of seeing the demon idea, subject, whatever you want to call that concept. Really, I wouldn't be dismissive of it, but I would probably look at it situation by situation.